So welcome everyone to Japanese 101. This is lesson I think 15 or so. The numbers don't really matter. Hey Hotame, how are you doing? Can't believe we're going this long without Te-Iru. Yeah, so I've wanted to cover a bunch of bases before we really get to it, you know? So let me just apply the proper music profiles here. Alright, so so Atha, you bring up a good point. Why now? Or why not until now? Why did it take me so long to talk about Te-Iru? I feel like to really understand Te-Iru, there's like a bunch of bases that you just kind of need to cover, or bases. Yeah, a bunch of bases that you need to cover. At least in my opinion. So why are we doing it now? Well, I think to really understand Te-Iru, you need to understand the Te form quite a bit. To understand that, like, why Te, right? Like, how does it connect them? And we've already talked about Te form, that it can link verbs together, and then it can link auxiliaries to verbs, which this is exactly what the case is with Te-Iru. Secondly, I do think it's quite important to understand transitivity, to understand Te-Iru fully. You know, it often comes up in conjunction with transitivity. And yeah, and thirdly, the other one was just I had a bunch of other stuff that I was really excited to talk about, so Te-Iru just kind of got pushed a little bit back. But now we're here, and now we're actually going to talk about it. What it is yet, but I'm sure you'll explain. Yes, of course. Of course. Rest assured, ladies and gentlemen. Te related any kind. No. This te that you just mentioned here, small tsu te, that's actually a quotation marker, so that's different. It's unrelated. Hey Luigi and Uchi, how are you doing? So, let's talk about Te-Iru. So the first things that we're gonna get out of the way, real quick, what do I mean with Te-Iru? It's fairly simple. What we mean is, we want a verb in Te form. And I hope you remember Te form. If not, we have done multiple episodes on that, so be sure to review that if you don't remember. It's not that hard to do. Te form conjugation, really essential, something to definitely remember. And then we just add iru, okay? And now we need to worry about what that does, what that means, okay? So fairly, construction-wise, this is extremely simple. All you need to know is the Te form of a verb. But what does it mean? And that's kind of where, you know, where the meat lies, the core of the whole structure, obviously. Like, what does it mean? What does it even express? Right? That's what we need to think about with any sort of grammar that we talk about, is what does it express? So here, this Pudels Kern. Here, Te-Iru, I generally break it down into two use cases. And it's definitely two different ones, because if you only consider it to be one case, it can be a bit confusing. Though they are like related, like they're kind of similar, they should still be sort of separate. They should be considered a little bit separate. One question is a little more transform doesn't take out the difference between Te-Iru, Te-Aru. Yeah, we can answer Te-Aru maybe a little bit after the session. Te-Aru sort of gets its own sort of thing. I don't know how long it'll take. Maybe we'll have time to actually just cover it. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So there's generally two things that I would say Te-Iru is used for, and those are progressive action, and then the second one has multiple names. So progressive is kind of simple, right? It's, you know, ongoing right now. Or, you know, relative to the tense of the clause. So if the clause is in past tense, then it was ongoing in the past. Just like when I say it is ongoing, that is a progressive statement in English grammar, right? It's a progressive tense. Like I am running means I'm running right now. Like ing in English, in a way, right? Yeah, in a way. I'm always careful with that, but I'll get to that. It's ongoing right now. And with right now, again, I mean relative to the tense of the clause, right? Like if you have a past tense clause, then you would have to translate you'd have to translate it as it was ongoing at the time, basically. But for now, we'll just think about it right now. And then the second one that it can mean, which often gets left out or neglected when people first learn about it, but it's just as important. For example, what Cole just said right there, わかっている is an example of that usage actually, not progressive tense, but rather, and I'm tempted to call this something like a resultative sort of use. You could call it resultative or like a continuous kind of thing. What it means, and I'll show it with a little arrow as well. So I'll call it resultative for now. It has like multiple names, but it doesn't really matter what we call it. Resultative. The resultative thing, because it focuses on the result of the action. It focuses on the action completing and ongoing. So what we're going to say is this is an ongoing, is this? Yeah, going result. And I'll make this red to really emphasize. Oops, ongoing result. So this is kind of where the magic happens. 痩せている, 太っている, I think. Yeah, that's a good example, right? Raise his hand. Is it the same as, yeah, 勉強している. That's also ている, obviously. That's する in te form is して and then いる, ている. So now, what's the tricky part is that these two are visually indistinguishable, okay? What that means is they're both just ている, that they both look the same, right? It's just sort of two different ways that we can interpret this construction. And in many cases, you have to sort of work with context. Konnichiwa. Sentao depan. Hello, yeah. I forgot about that meme. Hey, Silverbur. So what we have to consider is context, as always. You always have to consider context, because context is always important. And again, in this case, we'll look at a few examples, and it kind of makes sense sometimes, okay? Like, often you'll be like, okay, I can kind of see where this is going. And I feel like the easiest way of doing this is to look at a few examples. So we're going to look at a few examples. So first, we're going to look at some progressive examples where it's an ongoing action. And then we're going to look at some resultative ones where it's an ongoing result. So, right, so we're going to do this first, examples of this, and then examples of this. I don't really have to talk too much about the formation, since this here covers it all, right? It's very simple. Te form plus iru. And now, obviously, once you're in this stage, you can then just conjugate iru to change other things about it. I have mentioned this in the past, but the way Japanese conjugation works is basically that once you have changed a root verb to some sort of stem or like the te form, and you've added another verb, we will then leave this old verb alone, right? Like this one here, after we've done it into the te form and we've added something else, this will stay. This is not going to change anymore. If we want to keep conjugating, we will focus on the auxiliary instead, right? So this is what we will change if we wanted to change. If we wanted to conjugate further, we will talk about this. Hi, what is this stream about? It's in the title. It's Te-Iru. And it's also right here and here. It's basically everywhere. It's hard to miss, I would say. So, and that's the same is true here. Anytime you have sort of an auxiliary, you will focus on, well, you say that's all, but there's a lot in there to unpack. Usually I take about an hour per grammar point anyways. What isn't Te-Iru? So, you will focus on the auxiliary, and you will conjugate the auxiliary, right? And then, what you can do, however, is you can change this auxiliary to another stem and add another auxiliary, and theoretically this can keep going forever. So that's how you will add to your conjugation at the end of the day. Alright, so now, like promised, let's look at some examples of this. And like I mentioned, we're going to talk about progressive tense ongoing action first, and then ongoing result first. No, Te-Aru is not the same as Te-Iru. We might have time to talk about Te-Aru at the end of the lesson a little bit. I'm not sure yet. Te-Aru is like a little bit of a... It's related, but it's a little bit different. Has different rules. So, let's look at some examples. I will make a little... Yahoo Yahoo. Hello, Yahoo. I'll make a little 1 here, because we're talking about the first case. Kalai, you don't like verbs. Verbs are the most fun part of Japanese. They make everything go alive. Suddenly, finally, we have action, basically. So the first example, we could do something like, no, this has nothing to do with nominative. I don't think this. Also, cases are usually for well, they relate to verbs, but verbs aren't in cases, right? Well, we have to consider, like, cases are usually for nouns and pronouns and stuff like that. Kanji hard, basically. 授業気になるな. Conjugation is a funeral. A funeral. One thing that we can do is we can have something like gohan, which is just food, right? Or rice, depends. Or a meal. So let's go with gohan. Oh, and once again, my favorite verb, because I just keep using that over and over. Gohan o tabeteiru. I'm gonna use kanji for taberu. I just assume you know the kanji for taberu by now because I keep using it. Tabete, and this is obviously where, this is once again where the magic happens. We put te-iru. And now let's think about what this means. Tabeteiru. Okay. I forgot the duck thing here. Gohan. Wait, I actually forgot a bunch of stuff. I hope I don't mess this up too bad today because probably. There you go. Gohan o tabeteiru. There you go. Eve's favorite verb. I don't really have a favorite verb, I would say. There's some fun ones. Tawamureru is pretty fun. Means to frolic. Gohan o tabeteiru. So that just means, and maybe you can already make an educated guess. You know, it basically means eating, and let's say maybe lunch or dinner or whatever. Gohan can be any sort of meal of the day. Eating lunch, for example, gohan o tabete. Eating food, eating a meal. Eating a meal. I'm gonna say a meal. And then basically the implication is right now, right? So it's an ongoing action. Like a progressive tense. Or rice. Yeah, tawamureru. Eating a meal right now. It's a progressive action. In English, that's what we use the gerund for, the ing. Now, I want to point out, this is a bit of a red herring with the ing, because thinking that this is true, okay, thinking this is true, te-iru equals ing. Now, this is really bad. I do not like this. Like, I would definitely suggest you do not think of this as an equivalence at all. Why not, right? You're probably wondering, but Eve, why not? We just translated it to ing, so clearly it's the same. But no. If anything, I would say, if you're at all familiar with such notation, I would merely say that ing happens to be sort of a subset of what is possible with te-iru, right? Well, not even equals, right? Like, it happens to be that one thing we can do with te-iru is that it contains like ing sometimes. Okay, but either way, right? So this, I would definitely say, don't think of it as the same. It's not very useful. I think it's best to look at the literal meaning. Yeah, it depends on what you mean with the literal meaning. So, again, why do I say that? For example, a gerund, and this is generally called a gerund as far as I know, ing is generally called a gerund, can be used as a nominalizer in, it can generally be used as a nominalizer in English. Te-iru is never a nominalizer, okay? It's far off it. It's just a verb, okay? It's just a verb form. It's definitely not a nominalizer. Te-iru can be ing, but that's not usually true. Dawa, dane. Yeah, it depends, right? It depends. That's the issue. The real reason why I think that, by the way, Tokyo Outlaw X, thank you for the follow, arigatou gozaimasu. The real reason why I say don't think of it like that is because that's, like, I find it not very useful. You should remember what te-iru means, not what it translates to. And that sounds weird, but I like thinking of grammar points as on a very conceptual level, and not really on a translation level, right? So you should be able to understand te-iru in any language, because if you think te-iru equals ing, that only makes sense to you if you're like an English speaker. But that's not my goal. My goal is for you to understand the grammar as it, like what it expresses on a conceptual level, so that you could think of, how would I say that in my language? Oh, it's probably that. Something like that, right? Whatever language you speak. Almost always but ing is used in a lot of other ways. Yeah, that's the issue, right? So often you will translate it to a gerund, but the gerund is just so different as a concept that it's almost not useful to think of it like that. Especially because you have something like, I like eating. And that's the same in English. We also use eating. But there, we use the gerund as a nominalizer, where we say, I like eating, but we mean the act of eating. But that's not at all what Te-Iru does. You could never use Te-Iru to express that you like the act of eating. Instead of having ing in mind, having progressive in mind to resultative. Yeah, so there you go. That's why I never teach like translation stuff like that, or I try not to too much, because I find it easier. You know, I like eat would be better. Well, I like eat is also just grammatically wrong, right? I like eat. Depends on what you mean with better in that case. So eating a meal right now. Te-iru, tabete iru. Alright, cool. So that's an example of the first one, or I like to eat. Well, I like to eat, that would be correct now. Because there you're using an infinitive. One of the two. Well, I like eat is definitely wrong though. That's how grammatical terminology. Yeah, definitely. If I say eating chocolate is something I like, for example, that's still a nominalization there, because you're making eating chocolate sort of turns into a noun phrase there, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, the whole phrase eating chocolate sort of turns into a noun, because if it wasn't, you couldn't use it as a subject of the verb is or to be, right? It's you know, English is also complicated in its own way. So the deeper we get into it, the more, you know, eat I like. Oh, yes. So ご飯を食べている is usually translated as eating a meal right now. What I meant with relative time is, for example, we can make an example of that by just changing the tense of this thing. And remember, we don't touch tabe, the stem, anymore. This is finished. We're not going to change this when we conjugate. Rather, we're going to focus completely on the te-iru part. So, simply changing te-iru, all we have to do is conjugate iru. And we've learned how to conjugate iru. We know that just saying ita is past tense. So, tabete ita. So what does that mean? Well, it's very simple. It just means, you know, was eating a meal. And then, you know, at the time, basically. At the time, when it happened, you know, but in that relative time, it was progressive tense. At the time. If that makes sense, right? So that's how to think of a progressive action in the past. It's just that it was progressive, but it was in the past. So relative to that time frame, it was a progressive action. It was ongoing. So ご飯を食べていた. I was eating a meal. Yes, English is not equal Japanese. Ate a meal. Well, see, Beth, the difference between ate a meal and was eating is the sort of change of emphasis on an ongoing state. We have to always think about what it is that we want to say. Where, as far as the pure meaning is concerned, the phrases I ate a meal and I was eating a meal can be very similar. They both just express that sometime in the past you were eating. However, I was eating a meal sort of expresses this ongoing state in the past. It expresses our action of eating that was ongoing in that past moment. So for example, if I wanted to say that something else happened while that happened in English, I could say, while I was eating, my friend showed up. And that way we can express like that while it was ongoing in the past, something else happened before we finished that other action in English, okay? So in that way they're different. We wouldn't say, well, you could say something like as I ate, you know, as I ate, but it becomes a little bit different. And I don't want to go too deep into like the nuances in English, because English tenses are difficult in their own right. You know, English tenses are also pretty difficult the more you talk about it. Tabeta, ate, tabeteita, as I ate. No, it's not a, that's just the example I brought in English. So the shoes, he was smoking a cigar. Yeah, it kind of depends on what you want to say. Te-iru is a progressive tense. It just means that it's an ongoing action. So we are going to look at more examples of this. For a second, tabe deshita. I was really confused. Yeah, don't do that. Ayafumi-san, konbanwa. So, ご飯を食べていた was eating a meal. So that means it was ongoing in the past. Now, we can look at some other examples. For example, what would be another one? Miru is a good one, right? So we can say something like 配信を見ている. Right? So 配信 means stream. Like stream or broadcast. 配信を見ている. Te-Iru. Now, similarly, miru means to look, to see, to look at. Here we would use it as an active, like to look at, okay? So what do we get? 配信を見ている, you know, is watching someone. We don't know what the subject is, it doesn't matter. Is watching a stream right now, okay? So, for example, if someone asks you, watching a stream right now. If someone asks you, what are you doing? You could say, 今は, so 今は just means right now or now. 今は配信を見ている. I'm watching a stream right now. That way they understand that you've started it, but you're not done yet. It's ongoing. You're doing it right now. You're literally in the middle of it. Now, right, if we said 配信を見る, that's another nuance in Japanese, by the way. If you say 配信を見る, that generally implies that it hasn't actually started yet. Yeah, that's another. So Hotame uses the other kanji for miru there, which is often used for like watching TV and streams and stuff like that. So that's very accurate. Generally, I keep missing letters. Generally, when we say non-past tense, we mean that the action hasn't quite started yet. That's more of a rule of thumb. バイトに行ってきます。いってらっしゃい。Miru is like for a long time, right? No, not necessarily. Miru is more like, that one is more for like attentively watching something, like watching for a long time. No, it's more for like, as far as I remember, it's more for like when you were watching something and paying attention to it, like TV, a lecture, or a movie or something like that. Usually that's what it's used for, as far as I remember. So, in Japanese, when we use the non-past tense, like 配信を見る, generally we mean that it hasn't actually started yet. So we would usually translate this as I will watch a stream. 配信を見る. For example, if I say 今日は配信を見る, today I will watch a stream, right? Doesn't mean that I'm doing it right now. Actually means that it hasn't really happened yet. So it's only about to happen. So it's a future action. Japanese doesn't have a future tense, but the non-past tense, the standard tense, is generally interpreted as a future tense. Because if it was ongoing, you would choose to use te-iru instead, right? If you wanted to emphasize that it's actually happening right now, there is something for that, and it's te-iru. So when you say 今日は配信を見る, you would actually say I will watch a stream today. When you say 今日は配信を見ている, then it's more like, you know, today I'm watching a stream, so it's already ongoing. Some other nuances there is that te-iru can also be used for very habitual actions, okay? So, for example, if we want to talk about what we've been up to recently, we can also use te-iru. Sounds like it's scheduled. Oddly enough, I'm watching a stream today can have that vagueness. Yeah, it's true. I don't want to get too much into English because that's another issue with trying to go into like, oh, this tense corresponds to this tense. English tenses are really messy and really difficult in my opinion. So I don't even want to touch too much on like the English system. Also because it's not even that important, to be honest. We just need to understand the Japanese. So te-iru can also be used for habitual actions in that regard, and that usually applies to the progressive usage when some action is ongoing. So 見ている, 食べている. Say you've been studying recently, right? Studying is 勉強する. If you say 最近 means recently. 最近は勉強している. that can mean recently I've been studying, right? Recently, that's what I've been doing. It's a habitual action. 勉強している. So that's another usage of ている is to indicate habitual actions. Okay? Like when you've been doing something a lot or habitually, you can use ている as well to express that. It takes a bit of practice to get used to when it makes sense to use ている and when not. You know, but you can already see why I put... ている has a lot of stuff in it. It's actually surprising how much nuance there is in ている. So yeah, 勉強していた. Yeah, 勉強していた. Now it's just a past action. With these phrases, again, intent matters. What are you intending to say with it? So we can say like 勉強していた obviously means I was studying. But there's a bunch of things that we can do with that, like depending on what we're talking about. So say we're talking about last week and you say 勉強していた. That could be interpreted as I spent last week studying, like I was studying last week, basically for a extended period of time. Hi-san, こんばんは. If that makes sense, I hope it does. So, 配信を見ている would be another example of this progressive usage. You can also say 毎日配信を見ている. I'm watching streams every day. Then it's again habitual action. That's just what you do every day. You watch streams, right? 配信は毎日配信を見ている。テレビを見る、放送の内容を見る、テレビを見る、テレビ自体を、外見を見ると子供の頃習った。まあそうですね。確か。That does make sense. I should use まあ観測の観の方が多分正しいかな。でもなんか書くのはめんどくさいんだから。そうね。So Ayafumi brings up a good point. Apparently when they were kids they were taught that using テレビを見る with the proper like miru kanji, which is a bit of a... I didn't do it because it's a bit of a pain. It has many more strokes, so I was a bit too lazy to actually use it. But there, I'll use it now. And then it just has this. So miru, this would be like to actually watch what's going on TV, to watch like the announcer, to listen what is happening, you know, to actually watch TV. And if you use like テレビを見ている, that would be kind of like you're looking at the TV, even if it was off, right? You could still be looking at it. You're just looking at the TV. That's more like the emphasis here. You know, it's not like a huge difference, and it does depend. What's the difference between 勉強していた and 勉強した? Again, if you think about it, right? What is the grammatical difference there is that one is past progressive and one is just past tense. So what's the difference between a past progressive tense and the past tense is that one is an ongoing action in the past, or maybe a habitual action in the past, and the other one is simply an action that is in the past, which means that it's an action that is done. 勉強した just means I studied. That means two things. One, it means it's not now, it's in the past, and two, it means it's done. Those are the two things that a past tense in Japanese implies. It implies the past itself, and implies that it's done, that it is over, you're finished, okay? Compare that to 勉強していた. Well, we have 勉強している, but we also have it in a past tense. So what does that mean? Well, 勉強している means it's an ongoing thing, right? It's either habitual or ongoing, right? So there must have been some either longer period where you studied, or it must have been like it's ongoing right now, depending on that. But then what do? We change that itself into a past tense. So we take the same connotations as the other past tense, because all past tenses are the same, essentially. Like the ita here has the same implication. So we take this concept of an ongoing or long action, but now we apply it was in the past and it's over to it. So what does that mean? We have a prolonged period or a habitual action of studying that happened in the past, but now it is done. Right? Does that make sense? It's essentially just two stages. You use ている and you use past tense, and you see what happens when you put both of them together. Right? It's actually very simple. If you want to point out that time was spent on studying, use 勉強していた. Yeah, again, like, and as far as how we are to interpret that, again, it's just the difference in what you emphasize. 勉強した? That means you studied. 勉強していた? That also means you studied. In both cases, you studied, but it's a difference in emphasis. Do you want to emphasize that it was like a prolonged period, that it was habitual, something like that? Then you can say 勉強していた. Or maybe you need to have this emphasis to show that, like, that it was like a longer period of time because you have something else that happened during that time that is important with your sentence, stuff like that. Again, these grammar structures are useful because they allow us to say things in different ways. They are useful because they allow us to express ourselves more freely, right? The same way as it is in English. There's always sort of a purpose there. It's like, what do you want to say, and how can you achieve that? Okay. Now, I talked a lot about use case number 1 already. I thought this was going to be short, but every time I get started talking about Te-Iru, and this is kind of why I've been pushing it until now, is because I feel like if you really want to understand Te-Iru, there's a lot to talk about. There's just so much and so many like nuances and use cases and like you can talk about like conjugating it into past tense and stuff like that. And we haven't even talked about, you know, Te-Aru at all. Simply say that you studied something, say benkyou shita. Yeah. And then again, like this past tense nuance is included in shite ita because we have a past tense there, so it has that meaning included, kind of. That past tense connotation is included. But I found this first. Haishin. That's a bit different, yeah. So, number 2, if you remember, I hope you remember. If you weren't here at the start, I'll give you a refresher. The second use of Te-Iru, is there a trick to resultative? Do we get a sense for it? There is a few rules of thumb that I'm going to talk about. Or rather, there's one big rule of thumb, I would say. There's one big rule of thumb and has to do with transitivity. And the rest is context. So, number 2, as Valari already brought up, would be what I would call maybe a resultative or an ongoing result. Okay? So once again, we have something that is ongoing. Yeah, ifbot is still using the old emote. I haven't bothered changing it, actually. So we are talking about something that is ongoing, but rather than the actual action, it is the result of the action. Okay? And this is important. So, a very common usage of that is, for example, with verbs of movement like iku. Iku means to go, right? Iku. So, what can I say? I can say something like, let's say we have some subject here, and then we can say just like America. America. アメリカに行っている, okay? And you may have seen this, and you may have seen this explained. So, 行って, I'm gonna make this red, just because. 行っている. And you may have seen examples like this, and it was translated as some subject. The subject really doesn't matter here. Is in America. So why, right? Like why is in America? And I feel like when you first see this translation, it's a bit of a leap. It's a bit of like, wait, why? This is iku, it means to go. So where did the go? Where is it? It's not here. We lost it. But it's still kind of here because the way you express this is just different in Japanese than it is in English. You could say America ni iru. That means is in America as well. But the nuance with America ni itteiru means that they went to America and they're still there. Okay? Does that make sense? They went and they're still there. So how is this different? So what is the exact difference between saying this and saying this? Let me actually copy this. Maybe that's faster. I think that would be faster, right? Control V. Oops. Exactly. Yeah, I think this is a little faster. So what is the difference between this? So why couldn't we just say America ni iru, right? Doesn't that mean is in America as well? The answer is yes. But think about what the exact difference is. Oh, it's a new... Yeah, I changed the name so that it wouldn't constantly show up in Ace Attorney. So what is the difference? America ni itteiru, America ni iru. Well, essentially they're saying the same thing. It means they both mean that someone is in America right now. But here we have the added nuance of that they actually went there. Here we don't, okay? So this person here could have already been in America to begin with, right? Could have been an American. An American is in America is a correct statement if they're there, right? They may have never left. They've maybe always been there. But here, this is not possible. Here we clearly say that someone went to America. They weren't there before, they went, and they're there now. So that gives us this sort of option of implying that someone actually newly went to this place and is now there. Okay, if that makes sense, right? They left somewhere and they went somewhere and now they exist in that place. A way of maybe more directly translating this into English would be like, they have gone to America, but that could still mean that they're somewhere else now. That's where Japanese is a lot more specific, because usually when you say アメリカに行っている, that almost always implies that this person is still there, okay? They haven't left. Like, this person is still very much in America right now. The result is ongoing. That's what I mean with resultative. The result of the action is ongoing, okay? アメリカに行っている. They're in America. So, verbs of movement are a good example of this. Iku is commonly used like this. How would you say they're currently on their way to America but haven't arrived yet? That's sort of where the tricky part gets started. You can say something like 行く途中で, you know, 行く途中, that means is in the middle of going there. You know, it's in the middle of their journey to actually go to America. 行く途中. Yeah, that would be one that works. アメリカに行く途中. Never heard of resultative. It's like, it doesn't really have like a great name. That's the issue. So I kind of have to like come up with one. I think resultative gets thrown around a bunch. The other one would be, I guess the other one would be, I don't even know, continuous result. There's just not a great name for it, to be honest. Because people say it's just progressive tense for both, but it gets confusing if you think they're both interpreted the exact same way. So they have to have like a different name, so I give them a different name. So yeah, アメリカに行っている. So let's look at a bunch of other verbs of movement as well, since we're already here. And then I'll talk about sort of how to spot differences and stuff like that. So another one that is commonly used to be 登っている, okay? So 登る means to climb. So this is one that I often bring as an example. 登っている. I'll make this red again. 登っている. Now, 登っている can be used as someone climbed up to a place and is there right now. If I say 猫は屋根に登っている, that can mean the cat climbed the roof, or the cat climbed on the roof and is there right now. So we can say quite a bit of stuff in a very compact fashion that in English is kind of harder to convey that exact nuance using few words. We have to kind of be wordy with it. But yeah, 猫が or 猫は, whatever in this case, 猫は屋根に登っている. The cat is on the roof right now because it climbed up. We can sort of express both the result and how it happened in one thing. 去年イタリアに行っていた. ビールをたくさん飲んだ. Yeah, that works, right? 行っていた. So what Wolare gave us is a sort of ongoing result past tense thing, where it helps us emphasize the fact that it was a prolonged, yeah, if you had like if you didn't have the toki, I would read it as like almost two separate sentences, which is actually fine. Like, 去年イタリアに行っていた, full stop. ビールをたくさん飲んだ, full stop. That works actually, it's a perfectly fine way of expressing that. But yeah, 行っていた時 also works. It's kind of the difference between like, when I was in Italy last year, I drank lots of beer, or I was in Italy last year and I drank lots of beer, something like that. Whatever. Comes out weird in English. Yeah, 猫は屋根を登っている. Wouldn't this be the cat is climbing? Oh yeah, this is where also things get a little bit weird. So let's talk about this now, right? So how we can sort of differentiate. The problem with this ongoing result thing is that sometimes it's still progressive. Like, theoretically, 猫が屋根を登っている. I would say maybe 屋根を登っている is actually even stronger for yeah, I would say, so this is where the tricky part happens, right? I would say 猫が屋根を登っている is maybe even more strongly emphasizing like the result, like it climbed the roof and is there now. And then maybe 屋根に登っている could be interpreted with the に as sort of a target marker, that it's actually an ongoing action, and that's where the tricky part happens. to, right, the result ongoing can sometimes, or rather, you know, these things can be both, right? Nobotteiru can kind of be both. And the same goes for, I would say itteiru is not as common to actually be both, like to go. I feel like itteiru is almost always used with an ongoing result, but purely grammatically speaking, usually it can be both, okay? And there's just certain verbs have certain tendencies to be used more the one way and more the other. For example, a simple verb like tabeteiru is almost always used as an ongoing action and almost never as a result thing. Like if you say, you know, gohan wo tabeteiru, that's almost never used resultative. I can't really think of a case where that would be the case. But it seems to be more like a thing that certain verbs behave in certain ways. And the one rule of thumb that I can give you is that, in general, intransitive verbs tend to behave with ongoing states, and transitive verbs tend to behave as ongoing actions. So all verbs of movement count as intransitive. You have other verbs such as kimaru. Kimaru means for something to be decided, right? So kimaru will often also be resulting. So kimaru, which you will say as kimatteiru, right? So kimatteiru. You'll see this. Kimatteiru usually emphasizes that something was decided and it's fixed right now. So we're not going to change it anymore. Kimatteiru, it's decided. It's not going to change. It has been decided and it is decided right now. That's an example of that one. So yeah. Whereas something like kaku, you'd have kaiteiru. That usually means that someone's writing right now. You know, like from kaku to kaiteiru usually means like it's an ongoing thing that they're writing right now. So that's the one rule that I can give you. But the issue really is that for some, there are some edge cases. And for example, kaeru is one of those examples where it can really be both. And I've had discussions with Japanese people before, whether they would have like preferences, but they said no, it mostly depends on context, and you should be able to tell from context. So kaeru, to go home, kaiteiru can mean that someone is going home right now, or it can mean that someone is home, if you know what I mean. Kaiteiru, ie ni kaiteiru, that can mean that someone has left and is currently at home because they have finished the action of actually going home and they are in their home right now. But ie ni kaiteiru can also sometimes mean that they are currently in the middle of going home. So it's a bit tricky, and it's mostly like getting used to it, and from context it should usually be clear. If it isn't, like sometimes, and that's fair, right? Like sometimes things can be a bit vague and misunderstandings can happen. No language is immune to misunderstandings. I mean, it's human to sometimes not. I feel like, you know, it's sort of a natural thing for languages to sometimes be a little bit too vague and people forget, and misunderstandings happen. So there's not like a magic way of communicating that will mean that you'll never ever gonna have a misunderstanding about stuff like this. But that's not really unique, you know, to Japanese. You can say that. Kaiteita. To emphasize he came home and hence he's no, not really. Kaiteita could also be interpreted both ways. It could be that he was an ongoing thing in the past, or that he was home in the past. You can sort of, depending on the context, again, if we just add words, it can be clearer. Mo kaiteita. He was already home. He had already returned home. Mo kaiteita. That, I would say, would be more interpreted as he was already home. And then kaiteiru toki ni, kaiteita toki ni, ne, that's when it gets a bit weird. Kaiteiru toki. Yotte kaiteiru. Yotte kaiteiru. Yotte itte kaiteiru. So, yotte kaiteiru sort of implies that you were done being drunk, or so it kind of it depends on how you interpret it. So just saying te form and then the next one sort of implies a sort of completion of the first action, moving into the next one. So either you could interpret it as the action of getting drunk was completed, or you could say that you were already not drunk anymore. But like here, maybe yotte means like you got drunk, and then that's finished, you may be drunk now, but we sort of lose focus there, and then 書いている, and then you go home, and then you're home. Whereas 酔っていて書いている could be more interpreted as it's very much emphasized that you're still sort of in this, the being drunk part is still like ongoing. It gets complicated. Again, that's the issue with looking at these things in a vacuum. That's exactly what the issue is also with looking at like wa and ga sentences in a vacuum. I have to come up with all these like hypothetical contexts in which one or the other would make sense. Because in a vacuum, we just don't know, right? In a vacuum, you just can't say sometimes. If I present you 書いている, I just can't say one way or the other. 寄って書いていた or 帰ってきた. Alright, ready for my appointment, going cut out early today. Yes, Miru later. Take care, Beth. Good luck. Good luck with your stuff. Was it allergy, right? Allergy test. So yeah, the problem is with looking at things in a vacuum is always difficult, because when you don't have the context and you try and explain the differences, it basically becomes a thing of having to invent all of these hypotheticals to sort of fit a certain interpretation. But honestly, that's something that you're going to have to practice anyways. And as you learn more and more, as you read more and more, as you listen more and more, you'll sort of get used to picking these things up in context. Usually it'll be fine. Usually you'll be able to tell. Because also these are kind of like a little bit artificial when we're like trying like which one would it be, and like what is the exact difference there and there. Generally, when you're actually speaking, I gotta follow Komika. Thank you for the follow. Follow, arigatou gozaimasu. I completely missed that. Well, it's only 40 seconds ago. But usually when you're actually talking, and you're actually good enough to sort of, and it sounds dumb, but like when you're good enough to know what to say, you'll know what to say. And the only way to really get there is to immerse yourself enough to know what sounds right. Again, thanks for the host, Oryx. The goal of learning grammar is to get you to an intuitive level faster, in my opinion. In my opinion, the goal of learning any grammar is to get you on the fast lane for getting more input, comprehending more input, and then building an intuition much faster. Compared to when you do not learn any grammar, trying to figure your way through, sort of reading a book, reading a news article, or reading anything at all, or listening, is a bigger hurdle. Bleh, a bigger hurdle. Bleh, hurdle. What a horrible word to say. It's a bigger hurdle to overcome. Whereas if you can have like a basic understanding of grammar, or even a solid understanding of basic grammar, that barrier of entry is a lot lower, and you can get into actually absorbing a lot of natural language much faster. And from there, you can then start to slowly but surely stop relying on all that grammar and just, yeah, when like Cold said, just feel it. But it has to start somewhere, and in my opinion, that's what makes learning the basic grammar so powerful, is that it gives you that entryway. It gives you that it's that fast lane to get there, where other people have to guess or have to look at weird translations or use Google Translate. If you have a pretty good understanding of grammar, you can probably sort of figure your way through the stuff you're reading, and that way you can move on faster than these other people that maybe don't know about it, which means you get more input, which means you're gonna build an intuition faster, which means your reading speed will increase, your comprehension will increase. It just makes everything a little bit smoother. Just feel it. We have one on the server, I think, or don't we? Maybe. I have one lying around. Maybe I can add it on the Discord server. Hey, Aisu. Okay, I think we talked a lot about Te-Iru, and there's a lot to digest, I guess. So I think this is pretty good, because this has also been going for about an hour now, which is pretty perfect actually. Been going for 49 minutes actually. So I'll call it here. We'll do a quick recap. So what is Te-Iru? It has two usages, which I sort of split up into 1 and 2. 1 being ongoing action, and 2 being ongoing result. And those are like the main things. Ongoing result. And again, 食べている, I'm eating right now, that's an ongoing action. アメリカに行っている, that's an ongoing result. I am in America, or he is in America because he went there and he's still there, so that's ongoing. And then you have to sort of go from there. Rule of thumb, most of the time intransitive verbs will be ongoing results and transitive verbs will be ongoing actions, though not always. There's plenty of exceptions to that, and many verbs can be both, and you'll just have to decide from context, but it's a decent enough rule of thumb to sort of maybe develop a feeling for it a little bit faster. Te-Iru form can also introduce habitual action, or it can talk about habitual actions, you know, things that you do habitually. Let's talk about studying like we did before, like 今週は勉強してます, right? Or also obviously, this is a real quick thing as well. Obviously, you can make it polite by just changing いる to います or いた to いました, etc., etc. So those rules all still apply. Just like always, if we want to conjugate the te-iru, we just focus on the iru only. We conjugate only iru, so if we want to make the whole thing polite, all we have to do is go from iru to imasu. And we've talked about how to do the mas form for all verbs. And here it's even easier because all you have to know is the conjugation of iru. Okay? So just like we can put iru in past tense, te ita, we can also put it in mas form, te imashita, te imasu, etc., etc. And then the last thing I'll talk about is that often what you'll see is a shorthand, especially in informal writing, like internet forums, chat rooms, like short messages, emails, not business emails, but like casual emails, etc. So non-formal written contexts. You will often see the following, where the ru just gets, where the I just gets dropped, okay? Let me illustrate. You have te-iru as its natural form, and then what people will do is they will just drop this, and the same goes for spoken language as well. So what is te-iru can turn into teru. And you'll hear this very often. You'll probably hear me do it all the time. It is a very common thing. Arguably in casual language, this is more common than actually saying the I. So dropping the I is extremely common. It does not change anything about the meaning. It is simply a shorthand. It's simply a contraction. That's all it is. It makes saying the word faster and easier. That's all it does. It does not change anything about the grammatical meaning or the conjugations. It's just the same. And still, you would conjugate the newly formed sort of pseudo construction of teru, just like an ichidan verb as well. So not much to think about really. You can just put that into past tense as well, like teta, you know, tabeteta, right? Tabeteta maybe sounds a bit weird if you're not used to it, but tabete ita and tabeteta, just drop that I. You're not gonna really have to change anything else. It applies to all other conjugations of te-iru. You can always drop the I and you'll be fine. Same goes even for the mas form. So tabete imasu can often be tabetemasu. Okay, so that's like the last thing I'll talk about here. And that should sort of wrap up like the te-iru in its purest essence or whatever. So yeah, there you go. That was te-iru. That was, I think, was lesson 15. And then next week, I'm not quite sure what we're gonna go. This was definitely a big and important thing, and I think maybe next we're gonna talk about, we could move into conditionals next. Maybe that's also a huge topic. It'll probably take a while to talk about that. Te-form, you're still in school. Sensei, toire ni itte mo ii desu ka? Ah, yeah. Temo ii is sort of almost a fixed construction. Temo means like even if, like ittemo, even if I go, and then ii means good. So even if I go, is it good? So can I go? But yeah, that's something for another time. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Japanese 101. We'll be back next Wednesday for once, not Thursday. Usually I do this on Wednesday. And I hope you learned something about te-iru, and I hope you understand more about it. And it's okay if you're a little bit confused, because there's a lot more to te-iru than meets the eye. And I hope that confusion will be cleared up as you get exposed more and more. So there you go.